First of all, thank you for coming. Our keynote speaker this morning, Justice James Ogola, the Vice Chairperson of the EC, who is yet to be here, members of the the New EU Strategic Leadership Team and the entire membership, colleagues from civil society and the media, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored to be speaking to you on behalf of New EU at its launch. The National Election Watch Uganda, the New EU, was established following the emerging consensus represented in February 2020, a joint civil society communique on Uganda's 2021 elections, in which a cross-section of civil society organizations in Uganda, both at the national and the subnational level, agreed on key areas collectively to engage on ahead of that. This time we are going to be a continuing outfit that will observe elections. The New EU, thus, is a consortium of 60 organizations that are desirous of collecting, engaging on Uganda's election processes. It is established as a citizen-centered vehicle for civic engagement that focuses on developing viable solutions to the existing challenges in Uganda electoral process. Core to its working method, the New EU will build viable citizen structures and vehicles for involvement at the grassroots level through state and non-state, mutually reinforcing and collaborating with each other. New EU will specifically collaborate with critical government stakeholders, including the Uganda Electoral Commission, to ensure meaningful citizens' participation in the electoral process. Our vision is a peaceful and prosperous Uganda with happy people. And our mission is to build a new democratic culture where elections are citizen-centered and deliver credible and acceptable outcomes. The objectives of New EU, the overall is the confidence of men and women of Uganda in democracy as a option for sustainable good governance. This will be done through the involvement of citizens, civic organizations, and other critical stakeholders in the effort to deter and expose irregularities in elections. Our specific objectives include regularly create awareness about the issues related to or affecting the integrity of elections, enhance public confidence, and promote the participation of women and men in elections, mitigate the potential for election-related conflict, build a sustainable coordination infrastructure for regular stakeholder engagement on elections, and build active citizens' participation in the democratization process before, during, and after elections. The approach we intend to use, we will adopt a dynamic and hybrid approach that combines a network of citizens observers and hotspots observers. This strategy is adopted following a recognition of the fact that the widespread network of citizens monitors across the country build a sense of civic agency and citizens' commitment to democracy. On the other hand, a highly trained professional network of observers allows us an opportunity to generate scientifically verifiable data to inform a scientific determination on the credibility, fairness, freeness and fairness of an election. NUU will observe the 2020-2021 election process in 135 districts, at least 135 long-term observers. These are observers who will be not only on the polling day, but will be observing day to day. As you know, elections is not a one day thing, but it's a whole process. So we'll have long-term observers deployed, and we'll have 800 short-term observers deployed. These are the ones who will be deployed on polling day. Observers will be recruited, trained, accredited, and deployed per district to observe the party primaries, nominations, campaigns, processes, verify events, incidences, as well as produce status reports. The new observers will sign a code of conduct to protect the credibility of observers or observation mission. As you might have seen or heard, last week we released our first preliminary report or statement on the NRM primaries, and we intend to do that for all the others coming. Due to the model adopted by NUU, which includes involving citizens in election observation, LTOs will be useful in the verification of events and incidences reported through citizens observers to ensure the credibility of the information shared. As earlier on mentioned by the MC, we have specific areas of interest, or what we call thematic areas, that we'll be looking at. We will be interested on the gender issues and the gender dynamics and women's participation in the electoral process, youth and the elections, persons with disabilities, money in elections, media and ICT, peace and security, human rights will be observed by specific organizations in NUU. We are 60 organizations, but within NUU, these organizations are clustered according to those thematic areas, because these are areas they either have specialization in or that's what they are working on ordinarily. The NUU is a network of law-abiding civic organizations. I must emphasize that we are all legally registered organizations in this country as by law, united in the quest for free and fair elections in Uganda and the consolidation of a progressive democratic culture. Amongst us, these organizations possess a wealth of experience in elections, from past election-related mobilization, monitoring, observation, and civic conscientization efforts. The NUU believes in power of collectivity and leveraging on decades of innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll agree with me that time immemorial, most of the voter education and civic education in this country is done by non-government organizations. So we're in the right place at the right time to do what we have been doing, including domestic observation. The NUU currently has a membership of 60 organizations that are spread across the country. The NUU members are organized according to the thematic areas that I mentioned earlier, and 15 geographical locations. The NUU strategic leadership team will also invest time in building relationship, which we've already started. We visited the Uganda Electoral Commission, and we will work with all the other stakeholders that are relevant in the electoral process. And this is to ease communication, access to information, and more specifically, on election administration and related matters. The NUU coordinating organization will schedule monthly meetings to discuss observation reports on the elections with the Electoral Commission, police, political parties, And as I mentioned, these institutions, we are already in talks with a number of them, including the political parties and the Electoral Commission. Relationship building with duty bearers is important to us because it leads to redress of some of the anomalies during the electoral process. Access to information is crucial for observation, and it enhances transparency and accountability of duty bearers and stakeholders in the electoral process. During the election process, NUU will hold scheduled meetings like the one we are having today with the press, because we believe the press is very instrumental, particularly on ensuring that people have access to information, but also giving a balanced reporting. NUU will also produce publications, particularly containing statistics, information that we derive that is related to issues such as media coverage and other aspects of elections. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for God and my country.
Thank you, Ms. Rita Chiro, for those opening remarks. Without any further ado, I would like to invite Reverend Father Constantine Mbonabinji, the co-chair, also to come and make a rejoinder, and then we'll proceed from there.
Well, what I can say is that protocol observed. In the religious circles, we say brothers and sisters, you are welcome. I'm not going to talk much, but I'm just going to add something which I feel needs much of our emphasis. And this one is on the thematic areas. You know, many times, when someone hears that NUU has been formed to observe elections, he thinks we are going to be there on that polling day. See how the vote will be casted, and that will be the end of the story. No, that is not the case. First of all, look at the thematic areas. Thematic areas include gender and women participation in elections, youth and elections. You see them. And this is especially to the media. I love the media very much because you take the news to the last person. I would have liked, if I knew all the languages of Uganda, I would have liked to translate this in every language so that every person here, whether disabled, whether youth or lady, can know exactly what the NUU is going to do. Kasoka kimukanchogera mu Luganda olumenyefu benyefu. NUU si kye kibiina kigenda kulabirira kalulu kokka obanga olunaku luli lw'okukuba kalulu, naye kigenda kulaba nti eddembe ly'abakyala oba ly'abakazi likozesebwa litya mu elections zino. Abavubuka bakoze batya, babawadde mirembe, babawadde eddembe ey'okukuba kalulu. Abantu abalina obulemu, abaliko obulemu bakoze batya. Webabadde balondera obadde bakubirwa kalulu, abantu abalina obulema babakkiriza okulonda. Oba n'omucampaigns bakoze batya. Esente, ndowooza by'esente mubimanyi. Ekibadde mu kalulu akawedde ndowooza mubimanyi bulungi. Abannamawulire babayisiza batya. Oluusi abannamawulire tebakola ki? Tebabakkiriza okwogera mazima, babakuba ku mitwe. Eddembe lyabwe liri litya? Emirembe n'ebyokwerinda bibadde bitya? abapolisi bakoze batya oba bakola batya kati aba ame aba prisons n'abakoze batya eddembe ly'abantu balityobola. So those are the things each and every organization is going to look at. We have different organizations which are doing this critically and looking at them critically. And this is not an organization which has been formed today and tomorrow it will end. No. This is an organization which has started today and it will continue and will continue. It is not like those organizations you have been hearing which come and go. After elections, they go. But this one has come to stay. So, brothers and sisters who have come here, I would like us to take this organization of ours serious. Many things are going on in our country. It's good that when we look at people, most of them are still energetic, they are still youth, and they need now to see that our country becomes a better place for us to live in. We pray that New You becomes strong, New You resist temptation. When I talk of temptation, you know what I mean. Some of us will be bribed and say, please, you call B8 instead of calling it B. Such things are there. And we need to resist these temptations. We need to stand. We should have, you should have integrity. Without integrity, then we shall be. And I believe all the organizations here really will do much. Thank you very much, and I believe that we are going to make it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Father Constantine, the co-chair and the executive secretary for Uganda Joint Christian Council. We appreciate those rejoinder remarks that you've made relating to New You and its mission. Before we move to the next session, I just wanted to make a few remarks, but also some of you may be wondering, who is New You? So I would like to go briefly through the membership of the National Election Watch Uganda so that you know the organizations behind this, initiative, both at the national and regional levels. So I'll just go through the organizations here. We have the Uganda Women's Network. I've already introduced that. One of our co-chairs, Ms. Rita Chiro, is the executive director for that organization. But we also have Center for Media Excellence, ACME. We have the Alliance for Campaign Finance Monitoring, ACFIM. We have Uganda Joint Christian Council. You've already heard from the representative, Reverend Father Constantine, who is co-chair of New You. We have National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders. We have the Youth Coalition on Election Democracy, YSED. That is represented by the Uganda Youth Network. We have the Center for Constitutional Governance, CCG. We have the National Union of Disabled Persons of Uganda, NUDIPU. We have the Uganda Governance Monitoring Platform, which is UGMP, represented by the Uganda National NGO Forum, which is also hosting New You. We have Citizens Watch IT, SEWIT. We have Action Aid Uganda, where yours truly works. And we have Innovations for Democratic Engagement and Action, IDEA. We have the Kabarole Research and Resource Center and Public Affairs Center Uganda, PAC. Community Development and Child Welfare Initiatives, CHODI. Arua District NGO Network. West Ankole Civil Society Forum, WASCOF, Gulu NGO Forum, Bugisu NGO Forum, Palisa Civil Society Network, the First African Bicycle Initiative Organization, FABIO, Midwestern Anti-Corruption Organization, MIRAC, Agency for Development of Young Farmers in Uganda, Kick Corruption Out of Uganda, Lira NGO Forum, Rwenzori Consortium for Civic Competence, RECO, Uganda, Women's Democracy Network Uganda, WDNU, Forum for Women in Democracy, FOWODE, Action for Development, ACFOD, Riam Civil Society Network, Karamoja, Kanungu District NGO /CBO Forum, Hub for Investigative Media, Uganda Media Women's Association, Midwestern Regional Anti-Corruption Coalition, MIRAC, Center for Basic Research, CBR, Wiz Arts Foundation, FEMFORT, Transparency International Uganda, Uganda Project Implementation and Management Center, UPIMAC, Oxfam Uganda, Palisa Civil Society Organization Network, Kitara Civil Society Organizations Network, Humanity and Inclusion, Women's International Peace Center, Kabarole NGOs and CBOs Association, Chiboga NGO Forum, Midwestern Regional Center for Democracy and Human Rights, Creation for Africa, Uganda Radio Network, Uganda Media Women's Association, African Center for the Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims, Human Rights Center Uganda, Transparency International, Anti-Corruption Coalition, Citizen Platform for Democracy and Accountability, Native Voices International, the Apart Anti-Corruption Coalition, Rwenzori Anti-Corruption Coalition, Anti-Corruption Coalition of Busoga, Moroto Nakapiripirit Religious Leaders Initiative for Peace, TESO Anti-Corruption Coalition, and Mayank Anti-Corruption Coalition. Those are the members of New You. So everyone knows who is in the room and who is in the membership of New You. With that, I want to move and say that behind me here, we have the values of the National Election Watch Uganda. As you can see, it's been re-echoed by the co-chairpersons in their remarks already, but just for emphasis, citizens' participation is at the center of New You. Collaboration, we work with all stakeholders, accountability, human rights, and finally, we are non-partisan. Thank you so much. Without any much waste of time, I'd like to draw your attention to the program, son of this nation, who has served with distinction in public service as a judge and rising to the top level of that institution, but he's also served in various positions, including chair in the Elders Forum that has been instrumental in issues of promoting dialogue and ensuring electoral integrity in this nation. He wears so many other hats, but he's an admired orator at all occasions. Without any much waste of time, allow me this honor to invite Justice James Ogolla to come and make the keynote address on the topic, the imperative for domestic election observers in Uganda's electoral process. Justice James Ogolla, you're welcome.
Why do we have elections in the first place? In my view, elections are made to ensure the voice of the people at the governance table of the state. Let the people have their voice. Let them participate at the state table which determines the affairs of the same people. Yes, we've heard it said that God appoints leaders. That's very true. God appoints leaders. But the voice of the people is the voice of God. That's how he appoints them. In the ancient Greek world, the model of governance and leadership was through city-states. City-states were small enough to allow the majority, if not all the citizens, to participate directly in the governance of the state. This model sought to ensure the participation of every citizen in the running of their state. Then came the governance of the state through monarchies, where the monarch was all-powerful, to the extent that some monarchs were the embodiment of the state. King Louis XIV or XVI, I don't recall which, of France, used to say and to proclaim in French, "L'État, c'est moi." In English, the state is me. They would ask him, the state will do this. He said, which state? The state is me. Cast your eye quickly to about 200 years ago, less than 200 years ago, the 1800s, end of them. King Mwanga here, with the missionaries coming in and so on, and him getting the matters. What used to happen was Mwanga would wake up, and if he thought you had abused him, or disappointed him in some way, he would say, away with him. And they would take you away, drag you on your back to Namugongo. That's how that place is called, Namugongo. You arrived there on your back, pulled. And that would be the end of you. The state would have done its job. Mwanga was the state. Succession to the leadership in a monarchy was by the son or the daughter of the king or the queen. No will of the people was involved in that. Other people had nothing to say about it. You are born a prince, and from prince to king. In England, we have a prince who has been waiting, I think, for almost 70 years now. Prince Charles, just waiting for the mother to die, and he becomes the king. They will not ask the people of England, who do we appoint, who do we elect to be king? No. The fact of his birth is enough for succession to the throne. There came a deviant model on the scene. And this came mainly in the past colonial African states. That model was the constitutional assumption of power through the barrel of the gun. Idi Amin did that. That's the model he used. Nobody appointed him, nobody elected him. He just came with a gun, pointed it at everybody here and there. I was here. I look at this crowd, and I don't know that many of you were here. And that I was there. And they announced on the radio that the government that had been elected was no more. Another one was in, and the barrel of the gun was going. Prrr. Tito Kello and the other Kellos came in the same way. And in 1986, we had a similar thing. The guns roared, and the government came in. That's another model of how to get leadership of the state. But the prevailing brand of governance today in this modern era is the democratic model in all its variations. There's not one model of democracy, there are many. But the democratic one has the proposition that the people, by their own free will, expressed through the apparatus of the regular democratic elections, determine the leadership of their state. They do so at intervals. For instance, 4 years in the United States. For instance, 5 years here in Uganda and the former English colonies of Africa and elsewhere. For instance, 7 years in the French state and all the Francophone world of Africa and Asia. Distinguished participants, it is the execution and exercise of these kinds of democratic elections that form the thesis of my address to you this morning. The fundamental proposition of these elections is that they be free, fair, and credible. That proposition requires the prerequisites of openness and transparency of the electoral process. The element of open and transparent, in turn, presupposes the existence of neutral and independent people who can look in their own eyeglasses at the process and determine that indeed there's freedom, there's fairness, and there's credibility. Once upon a time, elections took place without the need for the participation of election observers. That used to be the position. With the passage of time, with the change of circumstances, with the growth and development of the electoral process, electoral observer teams are now a given. All around the electoral world, the standard practice is for the deployment of observer teams or missions. Here in our area, in our region, these teams come from the African Union, from the Commonwealth of Nations, from the European Union, from the East African Regional Community, from SADC, and so on and so forth. That's at the international and regional level. But likewise, there is another level of observers, the national or domestic observers, including, in the past elections, the Women's Situation Room, the Interreligious Council of Uganda, the Elders Council, TEFU, and now what we are going to launch in a little while, the new U. I like that name. New U can be the letter U or the word Y-O-U. All of us, we're in this. And you saw when the list was being read, just now, the list of what constitutes all of this. My goodness, I started to doze because everybody was in it, as it should be. We, the people, should have a paramount interest in seeing, observing, determining what's going on. We had a little rerun of that last Friday and over the weekend. And we all saw, even the blind saw what was going on. Because it was so loud. Guns blazing, people crying and lamenting. security apparatus, everywhere. Gas, what are those things? The tear gas. So even the blind could hear what is going on. They observed the election. Even though the existence and prevalence of election observers is now acutely obvious, it pays to stop a while and to revisit the underlying reasons and the objectives behind the need for election observers. In this current electoral season, grinding slowly to the 2021 general elections of February-March, the need for election observers has become immensely relevant and utterly necessary, more than ever before. Why do I say that? Let's take just two considerations which stand out as Goliaths of the current election cycle. Goliath number one, COVID-19, the pandemic without parallel in almost all human history. That pandemic has introduced an element that's wholly unprecedented in the annals of our elections. The constraints of the disease dictate an abnormal execution of the looming election. In principle, though not in practice, the election is to be conducted without the usual hoopla of mass crowds, pressing the flesh, and enormous public rallies all around the country. Those will not be there, in principle. But what we saw on Friday seems to be the opposite of that. The Electoral Commission towing the line of the COVID SOPs has placed a scientific election, or more accurately, they say a hybrid election. Such is an animal totally unknown in the theory and practice and execution of electoral history. The hybrid calls for minimum numbers of electoral agents. I think it has been said over and over that only 1 or 2 per candidate will be allowed in the room. And yet, elections are about the people, the candidates, the freedom to do and to see and to observe what's going on. That's why candidates go in there. But because of the hybrid and the science of this whole thing, only 1 or 2 per candidate will be allowed in. If 1 or 2, I've been an electoral observer myself, so I know what goes on in the ballot room and wherever and wherever. You sit there the whole day, and if the call of nature comes, I think it takes precedence over election. So you excuse yourself. Now what happens when you are out? And if there are 2 or 3, you can call in 1. But if you're 1, that's a mighty constraint there. Distances between, maximum distances between people will be observed. Queuing to go cast your vote will be at the absolute minimum number. Electoral officials equally will not be as many as they usually should be in the polling station. All in all, by the extreme novelty of this scientific hybrid election, the CEC, Election Commission, will be wearing a very tight shoestring, to be standing on very delicate foundation, and will be operating atop a makeshift scaffolding. You've seen scaffolding when you build a high-story building. You put all manner of poles around it so people can climb on it and so on. I'm saying the usual scaffolding for electoral practice is firm, because there are numbers, no restrictions. But this time, that scaffolding is going to be so delicate and tender. Matters will not be made matters will be made immensely worse by the generalized impunity of our own people that has been shown in the elections that have just been concluded. We saw the people do any number of things that the law said you can't do them. They were doing them. So how are we going to marry the illegalities of all the people and the constraints of all the Electoral Commission and everything in between and still come out and say that the election is credible, that the integrity of the election has been kept? And we are doing it for the first time. It's like an experiment. The more reason, therefore, to have neutral people, like you, to observe what's going on. First of all, to pronounce themselves on it when it's concluded, but more importantly, like has been emphasized, to see the reports for the future. What we observed last Friday was horrifying. The free flow of money, to me, was horrifying. The electoral queue became an ATM machine from which illicit banknotes were freely and openly and even recklessly dished out to the electorate. I have it on my phone here, many of you have had it, where there was a gentleman and others, they put people in the line and he just went out with a stack of these notes and pulled out two and gave this one, and that one, and that one, and that one. There was no campaigning, there was no manifesto, no explanation, just the money doing the job. It's horrifying, horrifying. Live pictures of these horrendous scenes have been captured and relayed on social media. This is not electioneering. This is election rigging. And here, election observers come in extremely handy to expose the blatant breaches of electoral integrity. What's more, the chances of any external observer, this is the second reason why observers are going to be so important. The chances of any external observers, AU, Commonwealth, EU, and so on, at the time of these elections is, as of now, it may change, but as of now, the chances are totally nil, because the borders and the airspace are under strict lockdown, making impervious the likelihood of entry of any external observers. The news that came last night is comforting. I heard the news on TV that Entebbe International Airport may be opened by October 1 or on October 1. That's most welcome. But the opening of that airport will not bring in hordes of electoral observers. It will take time for them to determine, to see what are the conditions with COVID. So their likelihood is not here. So they are coming in as usual. Maybe we may not have them. The more reason, therefore, that domestic observers will carry the huge responsibility of observing these coming elections. The second fundamental consideration for the need and absolute requirement for observers is the heaviness that's hanging over the neck of the nation like Damocles' sword, namely the ugly specter of extreme violence and chaos at these elections. The internal primary elections of a ruling party, mass party, well organized, well funded, well everything. Those are a strong pointer to what seems to be in store for us at the general elections. If the virulent violence and the massive and pervasive chaos took place at this level of internal, these were internal, in-house electoral contest, how much more will it be aggravated when the real context takes place? All that we have seen recently is the rehearsal, the friendly fire. But how much more intense will this become when we come face to face with the real stage act? Not just rehearsal, but the real stage act, the hot war between opposing foes of the army, of the infantry, and of the mechanized battalions of elections. Suffice to say that neutral, professional, well-instructed observers from within will be required more than ever before. It's not enough that the Electoral Commission manages the election. It's not sufficient that the executive implements the requirements for an election, such as releasing funds, deploying the security machine to keep the peace. Nor indeed is it enough that the legislature passes all the requisite legislation and rules and regulations to conduct the election. All these, yes, they must be. But even more importantly, all these must be seen to be in place and to be executed in a free, fair, and credible manner. And that is the work of the election observers. The Electoral Commission has its work cut out for it. The Commission must and has prepared a meticulous election timetable. It has put together a process and procedures and assembled transport of electoral materials and equipment. It must attend to the effective and efficient electoral logistics. It must recruit, train, and deploy the requisite electoral personnel, officers, and so on. In short, the Electoral Commission must be on top of the challenge, must be ready, capital letters, ready to execute the election. With all that in place, what then is the need for and the role and utility of electoral observers, whether they're external or domestic? Observers are a must. They are needed to fulfill the following, among many others. 1, to see, to ascertain whether and to what extent the resulting election is open, free, fair, and credible. 2, to establish whether the electoral systems and processes that have been put in place are adequate and effective for the challenge. 3, observers ascertain whether they have been put in place equal opportunity and a level playing field for all the electoral contestants. 4 or 5, I have now lost count. To ascertain whether the rules and the regulations and the processes and the procedures established for the election have been adhered to by all concerned. 6, observers undertake a kind of audit of the balloting, the authenticity of the register, the counting and transmission of the votes cast, and the tallying of those votes and declaration of the result. These are grave responsibilities that observers undertake. Theirs is the role of quality control vis-à-vis the ballot exercise. Theirs is the to act as witnesses. There's the voice of value addition. There's the duty to shine a torch in the murky, dark rooms of the election process. And theirs is the role of external auditors to the electoral process. The observers' audit of the process and the procedures and the systems and the substance of the election is done with a view to determine the openness and the freedom and the credibility of that particular election that they have observed. In a free and democratic society, such an audit done by independent, neutral, professional entities is highly beneficial. It adds tremendous value to the electoral exercise. We are blessed this morning to launch the new U Observer Group. New you, we wish you all the best in the coming elections of 2021 and well beyond. All the others here and all the others participating in this digitally or whatever, keep safe. You are also observers. Observe SOPs. Ministry of Health SOPs. Observe them. Like your life depends on it. Indeed it does. For God and for the elections of our country.
Thank you so much, Justice James Ogolla. Ladies and gentlemen, join your hands again in appreciation of that was the keynote address in the launch of the National Election Watch Uganda, presented by Justice James Ogolla. We thank you so much for standing unequivocally on the principles of democracy in this country and for making your voice count in those who stand for credibility, transparency, and openness of elections and democratic processes in Uganda. Ladies and gentlemen, I draw your attention to the program. We've been having establishing contact with the Electoral Commission. Unfortunately, as I said at the beginning, they are held in a complaint session, despite the confirmation that we got from the Vice Chair to be present here. But that's not going to hold us back from launching this initiative. One thing that has come through over and over again from our co-chairs, but also from the keynote address, is that elections are for the citizens. And that is important. It's for the people. In fact, one of the people who qualifies to speak about elections because of his involvement in it at various levels, former President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, said, I quote, "Elections belong to the people. It is their decision. If they turn their backs on the fire and burn it, they will just have to sit on their blisters." So elections are for the people. I want to acknowledge that in the National Election Watch Uganda, participation of citizens is not just a value, it is something that drives the mission of National Election Watch Uganda. And represented in this room are different members of National Election Watch Uganda who represent different civic organizations that are here. And so I'm going to ask us to go to the launch, which is basically unveiling, symbolic unveiling of a report that is put there that will be led by Justice James Ogola and joined by our co-chairs, Ms. Rita Achiro and Reverend Father Constantine Mbonabinji. And before they do so, circulating before you here are vests that will be using for election observation. As you've heard earlier, we will have observers in all the 135 districts of Uganda. I think we have now others as cities. We will have long-term observers, 800 of them. Sorry, 135 long-term observers and 800 short-term observers that we will be working with, training, equipping for observation. And so this process goes on for elections within the political parties, but they also go for the general elections that is scheduled for February next year. And so we're going to unveil that symbolic report there as a launch. And that is how we're going to move. And once our three panelists here move there and unveil that, I'll request you who are having jackets placed before you to put on those jackets, and then we'll come and take a picture here. And then I'll ask the rest of the team to move back as we open this up for media interviews, okay, for the panelists here. That is how the process will go. So as you have the jackets, feel free to put on them. And then I'll invite our colleagues, the panelists here, led by Justice James Ogola, and then accompanied by our co-chairs, Ms. Rita Achiro, who is also the Executive Director of Uganda Women's Network, and Reverend Father Constantine Mbonabinji, who is the Executive Secretary for Uganda Joint Christian Council. So it will be at a count of 3, from 1 to 3, you will pull it down. Yes, you will pull it down. So yes. So I'm going to count 3. 1, 2, and 3. There we unveil the National Election Watch Uganda. And this is the observer's report, how it will look like. And so from henceforth, this new you will be a watch for the elections coming in 2021. But the work of the new you really transcends elections. Thank you very much for that launch. Thank you. Yeah. So I'll invite those with jackets to come in front. And then I invite my panelists to come here. We want to show the back of the jackets, which says the observer. Yeah, okay.
So we just want to cover the top part, just to show.
I've been reliably informed that turning the back is not gender sensitive. So we have to be gender sensitive. So please, can you come, those in jackets, so that we can take a picture? And remember to maintain the distance. And let's do this, the pictures quick, and then thank you so much. I'm going to give you half a minute to finish the pictures. Yeah. Okay, can you do the general pictures very fast? Ms. Rita Achiro, the co-chair, can you come to the front so that we can get your picture? This is important. New you.
Some people at the back, so that we have, make sure you're wearing your mask.
Thank you so much. If you're happy, you inform your face.
Eyes will smile.
Thank you so much. That's it. And now I invite our panelists to come and have a seat. It's now time for the media.
I'm going to request that only journalists come to the front. Members of the new you, this time you're vacating the seats. So we can go and observe what's happening outside.
Yeah. So journalists, please come. If you have questions, this is the time for it. We will not spend long taking the questions. So please make sure that you move in front and as we draw this to a close. Okay, and questions? Questions to the co-chairs?
Excuse me, we have very little time.
Thank you very much. My name is Moses Mulondo. I'm from the New Vision. In the last general elections of 2016, both international and local observers came up with reports. And I remember the common conclusion from all the observers was that the 2016 elections were below the common democracy benchmarks. And I would like to know, and you, many of you actually were local observers, and you made so many recommendations that had to be implemented so that the next general elections are much better. We would like to know whether you think many of those recommendations you made after the 2016 elections were implemented, and if you think that 2021 will be much better. Thank you very much.
We'll take 3 questions first. Any other question?
Good morning. I am Rita Kanya from NTV. I have 2 questions. One is what criteria was used to get the 60 organizations that are a part of New You in, and also the other is what platforms will you be using as New You when it comes to observing, given that it's scientific with the election that we're getting into. Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Namaja Irene. I work with NBS TV. Off of the previous elections, we had complaints from local observers who claimed they were being tortured or whose rights were being violated. Again, it's the fact that international observers were not facing the same. Is there any particular engagement that you are having in relation to that?
Okay, can you pass it to him, then we can come to the panel here.
Good morning. My name is Didan Kimathi. I report for Chimp Reports. Somebody would like to know. Chimp Reports. Yeah, somebody would like to know, when does the observation process begin? Because there are those that argue that an election does not get, does not get flowed just after they have announced maybe a roadmap, but even before the process can tell. Thank you.
So can we take those first? I'll request the panelists to use the microphone because this links directly to the online publications that we have. In addition to what you have before you here, you can hold these.
Thank you. Very good questions from all of you. I believe they enrich the discussion that we are having here today. I'll leave the 2 questions to the co-chairs, criteria for new U membership and so on. That one came from NTV. And torture of observers and so on. But let me take a swipe at the other question, the first one. Reports of observers, whether local, internal, or external. How about their implementation? Are they ever implemented? Will these ones be implemented? They may well not be implemented in the sense in which we all think. Once we have a report, then it's dealt with immediately. But there are repercussions to reports. They sit here in our libraries, society, and everyone listens to them, hears them, and they form their own conclusions. That's value added to the understanding of the system. So even if nothing else is done, just that the people who participated in the election have heard from the professional people who observed it, that is value added to the knowledge reservoir of the nation. But even more importantly, should there be election petitions, as indeed they always are, these reports can come in handy when they come as evidence to the courts of law. We remember the famous Supreme Court case here, where they said all manner of things and said, you know, the Electoral Commission had breached this and that and the other and so on and so forth. That went into the thinking and the deliberations of the judges. And the judgment that was issued had some content of that one. In Kenya, a similar thing happened in the elections where the presidential election was nullified. I believe a similar thing could come in Malawi. So these things have value. At least at the judicial level, they may well have value. But also systematic systems. When we design new systems, we take into account what went wrong in the last ones. And those who design those systems formulate the weaknesses of the last election as put in observer reports and other reports. They take that into account too. The external observers are even more important in a sense because their origin, the European Union, the Commonwealth, the African Union, and so on, will act in their relationship to the particular state. They will act with that in mind. They will know what went on in the last election as per the reports of these observers. And so they can tune that relationship according to what is written in those reports. So let's not dismiss it and say, well, the report is here, but nothing has happened. Things have happened underneath, and they are in the files, so to speak. The other one was timing observation groups. Do they come in when the election is taking place on ballot day? Is that when the election starts? Not at all. Electoral process is not an event. It is a process. Begins when the Electoral Commission begins to put together a timetable and all of that. It goes all the way through after the ballot is cast and the announcement of the result is made. So the ideal thing is to have observers at every level of that timetable. It's not practically possible for the external observers to be here for a whole year. But it is possible for domestic ones to begin to take activity as activity begins, even for a whole year. So therein lies the value of the domestic observers. They have the opportunity to comment on every step of the way. And so to me, the observation should not be an event of 1 week, which is normally the timing for the external observers, because they take into account the timing, the cost, and what have you. They can't be here forever. But the domestic observers fill that gap. I thought I could speak to those two and then leave the others to...
Thank you so much. I will request the co-chairs to respond to those questions.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm going to talk about some of the recommendations which have been always given by election observers. Yes, we had recommendations in 2016, especially when it came to civic education. And you know what has happened this year. We had a recommendation concerning vote education. And up to now, nothing has been done. I can say here, nothing has been done. You remember when we observed in 2016, a lot of ballot papers got spoiled. Why? Because the voters were not very well educated. Civic education, this helps citizens to understand what kind of person they are going to vote. Otherwise, if we had a civic education, true civic education, the issue of money, bribing voters would not be taking place. Yes, they would take the money, but know what the right candidate to vote. That's an issue which we have to do, which we are kind of, we advocate, but the people to implement are others. I go to the issue of, again, when do we observe and when does rigging of the votes begin? It does not begin on the day of election itself, no. Corruption begins before. Before even this election is started, people who are going to, who know that they are going to stand again, had started giving out money. We cannot deny that. Secondly, when we look at let me take an example of what happened last Friday. The issue of giving small things did not happen on that Friday. I saw some of you who are observing the media. The issue of giving money had started before. And so it is ongoing. That's why NUU has been formed to observe before, during, and after elections. So that we can be following up each and everything, and we can make our citizens know what they are supposed to do. We cannot say totally they don't know what they are supposed to do, but they are being manipulated. Maybe because of poverty, maybe because of what, I cannot tell. Now, when you come to the issue of the 60 organizations, we found out that really we are all doing the same work. You know, the Uganda have a proverb which says that agariwamo gakakorachi checho chenyini. So we decided to come together, bring all the knowledge together, and we go ahead. And this also brings about our integrity. If UJCC is to bring something on table, this is what they can offer. We have Action Aid. This is what they can offer. We have another group. This is what they can offer. Then when we put that together, something good can come out of it. And these people, these organizations are the ones which have been involved in observation of elections for many years. I can refer to UJCC. UJCC is older than almost all of us here, except Justice Ogol and maybe Canon Kaiso. But UJCC has been in existence since 1963. And it has observed elections from all that way. And giving recommendations. So what can UJCC bring to the table now? That kind of experience. Action Aid, what has been happening there? What can they bring to the table now? And now we work together to make sure that we go ahead. And that's what we are doing. And I think we shall do it when we are united.
Thank you very much, Father. Just to add on the criteria for the selection or who belongs to the consortium. First and foremost, we are all registered organizations as by law and as required. Secondly, these are organizations that are ordinarily working on issues of governance and democracy. Thirdly, the fact that these organizations, as Father said, have vested interest in democratic governance. And that's what brings us together. And lastly, it's, the membership was opened. So people had the option to join, depending on the interest they have. As you know, organizations have different areas of interest. So I hope that's clear. On the issue of the platform, I think that is my namesake, Rita, who asked, what platforms are we going to use given that these elections are scientific? I want to challenge you the extent of the scientificness, given what we saw last Friday and how things are going to happen. What we can guarantee you is that we are going to use all available means and platforms that are legal to observe the elections. We will do the traditional observation. As we mentioned, we have the 135 long-term observers, and that also answers the questions that elections are not one day. It's a whole process. So we've already started, and it will take us up to the general elections and the presidential elections. We will, of course, take into consideration the SOPs. We are not going to put anybody at risk. We piloted that last Friday, by deploying in close to 35 districts. So we'll use all that. And then, as we said, we have different platforms. ACME is here, ACFIM is here. We are going to monitor the media as well, and media monitoring is not only the print, including the electronic, how you report, whether you're balanced, and all that, and we're also going to do finance monitoring. The other question was, I think, on how are we going to protect domestic observers. First, I think our keynote speaker made it very clear. Domestic observation or election observation in general is a legal process. So we're not doing anything in the dark or in hiding, and that's why we're having this launch. Secondly, as domestic observers, we're citizens of Uganda, and we would like to contribute to building a democratic country and a democratic culture. And the only way we can do this is by observing and issuing out reports. As mentioned by our keynote speaker, these reports can be used in different spaces. It can be used to enhance civic education. It can be used to enhance voter education. It can also be used for a reform of laws. So that is the contribution we are making as citizens of Uganda. We are operating within the law, and we hope we will be treated as law-abiding citizens and will not be harmed. I would like to give my colleague Perry to just highlight one or two things that are very, from a legal perspective. And I think those were the questions. I don't think we've left out any. Perry.
Thank you, Rita. There was a question on, of course, the implication of observation. One of the things we saw during the NRM primaries tells you the importance of electoral commissions, whether national or political parties acting on the recommendations of observers. The Supreme Court, in the case of Amama Mbabazi against Yoweri Museveni and others, recommended that donations and fundraising should not be happening during elections. Unfortunately, Parliament did not amend the law. So what we saw in the primaries of the NRM is part of failure by electoral commissions, both at national level, but also in political parties, to have laws that check election rigging. So that is the perspective that we also want to bring, that these recommendations have implications for future elections. That's why different actors, especially parliaments, must take the recommendations very seriously. The other, with regard to protection of observers, we have the Human Rights Act, which is in place to ensure that particularly security agencies that infringe on the rights of citizens are penalized. So we are hoping that security agencies who may infringe on the rights of citizens are penalized in accordance with the law. But we also know that we have different expertise on the new you. Some of our members are engaged in human rights work and also exposing human rights violations, but also litigation. So we are hoping that all stakeholders will abide by the laws of this country and that our observers who are also citizens of this country will be protected and that their right to observe will be promoted by all actors. I thank you.
Thank you so much. That brings to a close this media interview.
Henry Nesar.
Yeah, they want Luganda versions. You will need to repeat the questions that side.
Okay. Now, which one do you want me to? Which one do you want me to?
Okay. I think they want it.
You open the criteria, and I translate the criteria in the Uganda.
No, I didn't write them. I have them in there.
Olwaki tukoze ki? Ekibiina kino ekituyita New You National Election Watch kirimu ebibiina 6. Ebibiina bino katugambe byebirina interest oba byebirina entegeka ey'okulaba nti obululu obw'omwaka ogw'2021 bubere bulungi. Ebibiina bino bye bimu ku ebyo ebibadde birondola oba ebibadde birondola obululu okuva mu myaka ey'amabega. Katugezeeko nga Uganda Joint Christian Council ebadde mu kintu kino ekyokulondola obululu oba okulaba nti obululu busulibwa bulungi okuva mu myaka ey'enkaaga. Naye tulabye nti singa tuleeta amanyi gaffe ag'ebibiina byonna ne tugateeka wamu, kubanga buli kibiina kirina amaanyi gakyo ng'ekibiina, ne tulaba nti singa ffenna twegatta wamu tujja kukola ekintu ekivaamu era ekirina amagezi, kubanga Abaganda ngo boogera nti agali wamu gagaluma ki? Gagaluma ennyama. So ebibiina bino tulabye nti bijja okukola ki? Bijja okulondola okulonda kuno okuva kati n'okutuuka ku lunaku luli lwennyini era n'okugenda mu maaso. Si kyo ekibiina ekijja okukola nti bakitandise leero era omwaka ogujja oba omulala kijja kuba nga kiweddewo. Ekyokubiri, tulabye nti waliwo ebintu birala eby'ebibiina birala oba recommendations twali tuwaddeyo mu myaka ey'edda nga mwaka gw'2016 2011 ebibadde bitawaanya obululu. Naye ne tugamba tuti nedda, kati tutula wamu tulabe ebintu bino binagwawo bitya. Naye si kiri nti tujja okugamba nti katugende mu gavumenti tugambe tuti mukole kino nedda. Tulina recommendations oba tuwayo ebirowoozo byaffe eri parliament ne tugamba tuti kino tekyagenda bulungi, kino tekigenze bulungi, nakino tekigenze bulungi, kino kirina okukolebwa bwe kiti tulabe nti okulonda kubere bulungi. Good. Naye okulonda kuno kw'omwaka 2021 bakuyise scientific. Ekigambo scientific ndoza kirimu engeri yebayita okujja okubera okulonda kwa science. Science eno muliko okugondera amateeka agatekebwawo Ministry ya Health. Naffe ng'ekibiina kino tujja okulaba nti mu butuufu abantu abagenda okulonda balina okugondera ebintu ebyo. Secondly, tujja okulaba nti bino ebyatekebwawo okulaba nti scientific elections eno ebeewo birina kugenda mu maaso bireme kuba nga bibaddewo olwokutaano oluwedde. Twalaba waliwo okubeera social distance, naye eyo social distance abantu 100 tebayinza okukola social distance eyo. Naye tulina okulaba tuti ekintu kirina okubaawo. Era ekirala ebitujja kuba nga tujje omu bantu naddala bye tuba tujje okutunulira ebigenda mu maaso tujja kubireeta tubyawe electoral commission oba tubituuse okuba nti bali abalina obuyinza tulabe nti tuti bigenda mu maaso nga tetunatuuka ku lunaku luli lwennyini olw'okukuba kalulu. Ndowooza bye bitonotono binyinza okwogera mu Luganda olwange olumenyefu.
Thank you so much. This ends our media interviews and formally closes the launch of the National Election Watch Uganda. And we appreciate you for coming, and we look forward to interacting more with you as we observe elections, as we brief you on the reports that come from the field and based on our analysis. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.